Hello and welcome to Radio Somanaut. I'm your host, Whitney Dawn Pyles, and in each episode, I'll be interviewing inspiring and innovative individuals who are impacting the world through somatics, using the modality we call body-oriented coaching. Each one of my guests is a Somanaut. That means they're a graduate of the Somatic School, an online educator that trains coaches to be stewards of the body's wisdom. We'll be hearing their stories and getting particularly curious about how they're carrying this impactful work into their lives and communities. So in the spirit of the Somatic School, my invitation to you is to embrace ease, take a breath in, and allow their words to be a welcome exhale. Hello and welcome to Radio Somanaut. This is Whitney Dawn Pyles, and I am here with Steffi Young, and we have been planning on having this conversation for a while, so I am just filled with excitement and anticipation, and lots of joy is here with me today. So throughout her long career in management and finance, Steffi has always felt a deep passion for psychology. After years of personal experience with mental health challenges and feeling stuck in traditional approaches, Steffi discovered the transformative power of somatic approaches. In her 30s, she decided to take the plunge and pursue a career in psychotherapy, which also led to studies in body-oriented approaches. Now, she is dedicated to helping others through a body-centered approach to healing and lasting change. In her work, she integrates a focus on attachment and deep awareness of the inner child. And I can't wait to dig into all of this more, but welcome to the podcast, Steffi. Happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. Love to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love, don't always begin this way, but it feels appropriate with you. But I'd love to just start this conversation as many containers with the Somatic School begin, just with a round of right now I'm feeling, right now I'm sensing. So maybe just taking a moment to capture that as well, an invitation for the listener to capture that as well.
Yeah. So I'm feeling excited, extremely excited to be here. Just excited to see what comes up, what unfolds. And I'm sensing maybe a bit of jitteriness around my heart area, which I'm in touch with is probably quite pleasant, actually. It's not an uncomfortable jitteriness. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Steffi. Yeah, right now I'm definitely feeling that excitement, as I said. And it's been a little of a hiatus for me in terms of recording. We've taken a month off before hopping back into recording this season. So just dusting off the old podcasting microphone. And so I think I'm also sensing that, jitteriness was a great word to describe it, but just this really kinetic energy around my heart area and being in a space and a role that feels very familiar, but a hat that I haven't put on for a while. So, just sensing a gentleness as well within me around that. So, yeah, listener, I hope that you're as well capturing your present moment experience. And as always, hoping that as this conversation unfurls, that you find what is nourishing and inspiring to you. And Steffi, I'd love to just begin at the beginning, in a sense, or one of the beginnings, or the beginning of a season for you. So with that, I know we've talked a little bit outside of recording about your personal journey and how it led you to both pursuing a master's degree in Gestalt Therapy, correct? As well as enrolling with the Somatic School and training to become a body-oriented coach. So I'd love to hear a little bit more in your own words about your journey and how it led you to these things, these trainings.
Okay, so I've always been interested in psychology. I think it would have, looking back, I think it would have always been a first option for me to study it. But what my situation, my reality was that I was riddled with anxiety in my teens, which made me feel like studying psychology might send me into a bit of a tailspin, so to speak. I didn't feel like I had the capacity to hold myself in that knowledge. So it sort of remained a side interest of mine, but a very strong side interest. And then fast forward many years, in my 30s, I started to realize in therapy, I went into like another stint of therapy. It was probably about my third stint of therapy at this point, with this newfound interest in, not interest, more determination to take full responsibility, be completely raw about everything that, you know, past experiences with my anxiety and everything. And it just felt different. So at that point, I was ready for a massive, deep dive into myself. And what I realized through that journey is, amongst things like I recognize my own resilience and so on, what I realized is that my own mental health struggles weren't actually going to be a burden, but probably an asset when it comes to going down this route. And what I learned from studying psychotherapy for half a decade and from being in the Somatic School and so on is that, I mean, many of us actually have these experiences, they're shared experiences, right? So yeah, I realized that I needed to take the plunge and move into something more psychology oriented. I embarked on what was going to be a 10-year journey because I thought I needed to start another degree. And I started studying psychology, but a year into it, I realized that I qualified for the master's. So I'm actually here a lot sooner than I'd hoped. And it's been life changing in so many ways. And I mean, the Gestalt Masters is an experiential master, so in and of itself, it's a growth journey, unlike any other. And then through that journey, there was a separate process going on, where I had become a great therapy client for all intents and purposes. I was the perfect client. I was super self-responsible. I knew all my patterns, and then what? So at some point, some 2 3 years ago now, I think two, I realized that I needed more. And in my own journey, I started to realize that somehow the field started sending me information on somatics and it started landing differently. And then at some point in 2024, I said, as I'm in my placement of the Gestalt Masters, I realized that I wanted to be qualified in something which is very directly somatic, because from my own personal experience, therapy is beautiful and Gestalt therapy is actually quite a somatic modality in any case, right? But it's like people don't recognize that we work a lot with the body. So I wanted something to solidify that. I felt very drawn to it. And through a lot of Google searching, I found the Somatic School. And I decided to enroll during my master's, which felt a bit, I didn't have a lot of support. I mean, I am very supported. I'm very lucky, but I had a lot of people looking at me like, are you crazy? Like, this is nuts. You're super burnt out. Why are you doing this to yourself? But something felt right. And fast forward so many months later, I finished the master's. I'm at the tail end of finalizing the things for the body oriented coaching. And I feel more aligned than ever. So that's what got me here.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to name right now the other things that I want to hear about. And then I'm going to go in a different direction. I do this. I do want to dig into Gestalt therapy and why you went into that specifically, as well as how it weaves into, it plays well with body oriented coaching and what you've trained with the Somatic School. So I absolutely want to go there, but I'm really curious about something that you said as you were talking about your journey, and as you were talking about kind of how external parties reacted to your decision to take on a coach training while you were in a therapy master's program, and almost hearing from others, what are you doing? You're going to burn out. um yeah, I'm wondering how that experience was for you, and how it was different than those expectations that others were placing on it. So what was actually your experience
Mm,
of being on these parallel journeys at the same time? What was that experience like?
mm. Um, I just, do you know that feeling when something feels right and you feel like you're in the right place and you don't necessarily know where it's going? You don't necessarily know why you're doing something specifically, but something in me just knew that this is the direction I needed to take.
Hmm.
And I remember when I started my Gestalt Therapy trainee placement, which would have been a year before this. I remember telling the people in my lecture, in my small group, saying, and the lecturer, I remember saying, my soul feels like it's in the right place. So, and then a year later, when it came to the somatic coaching course, the body-oriented coaching course, it was that multiplied. It was amplified
Hmm.
because for me, it just made sense. I mean, there's a lot, as we can imagine, because we even bring Gestalt into the body-oriented coaching course, there's a lot of overlap. So somehow my Gestalt training I felt like my Gestalt training supported me beautifully with my body-oriented coaching learnings, and my body-oriented coaching learnings, firstly from a sort of learning aspect, supported me with my Gestalt training because I had a lot of breakout rooms, so I had a lot of practice of maybe something similar kind of to what my final exam would be like in Gestalt. Because it's a bit of a performative thing, our Gestalt final exam. But I think more importantly, which is it was like a bonus thing I got from the course, which ended up probably at the time being the biggest bonus, that the somatic coaching course, the body oriented coaching course, was such a grounding space, even being in contact with another in the breakout rooms. There was so much going on in my life through 2024, and sometimes I'd go into a breakout room, and sometimes I was the one starting as a coach, and even in that space, it was just such a beautifully grounding space. And so,
Hmm.
how can you not, how can you not appreciate having the two in your life at the same time? It's
Hmm.
not to say that there weren't weeks where I thought this actually was crazy. I should have listened to this. So I'm not denying that there was an element of it may have been a bit too much to take on, but all in all, I think it's been a much bigger blessing than more than anything else.
Yeah, so really hearing that, where at times, of course, it felt like there was a lot on your plate, because just really there was a lot on your plate.
Yeah,
But through being in these programs at the same time, and specifically being in the space of the somatic school, there was something really grounding about that experience that really kind of supported you through through the therapy program, and that resonance between it, just something that I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like almost there was a naturalness to it because of that, how they
yeah,
paired well together, and
exactly.
prepared you for the other, it sounds like, as well.
Exactly. I mean, the I realistically, I was extremely dysregulated. It had been years of, um, it is the Gestalt Masters is so time intensive, extremely time intensive with a job as well and so on. So I was not in a very regulated, like my baseline was not like this, I was dysregulated. And it's almost like the body oriented coaching course just kind of gently forced me into that space where, okay, so how are you feeling? Oh, oh wow, I've been awake like 4 hours today and I have not once realized that I actually feel like crying today. You know, something as um basic as that, you know. Now I'm much more able to wake up and think, oh, I really feel like crying and maybe I should listen to a sad song. But at the time I was in such functional mode that there was no room for that, there was no time for that, there was no space for that. We just needed to get on with it. And I'm also very lucky that to be blessed with the Mantare group. For anyone who's listening who wouldn't know it, it's the names given to the cohorts. And my Mantare family were just the most beautiful. Honestly, I can't express enough how touched I am to have experienced getting to know such beautiful individuals. I've met them when I've been to London a few weeks ago. It's like I've known them all my life.
Yes.
Yeah, they just feel like home. So many of them, and there was a lot of resonance with a couple of us as well. So it's like, I know we haven't known each other for long, but hey, I get you, you get me, and something about us feels really easy about this friendship, you know. So yeah, it was a very much an all-round experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a thread here on this podcast is both the nature of the container, um, and how grounding and settling and resourcing and regulating the container is, and then the serendipity of feeling like you've arrived there with the people that you were meant to be in this container with. I just, it's just magical. I actually just at the beginning of January met my first Somanaut in person as well. And so really resonating with what you're saying about that, and that crossing that threshold from knowing someone from the chest up to, you know, seeing their feet and how tall they are for the first time. And even though that's the case, still feeling that deep connection, even though you've crossed that threshold from the virtual space to the in-person space. And I think there was something within me certainly that, and with Rachel as well, who I met, that we really named, that we wondered how that was going to be, to go from being held and experiencing a digital space with these people, and then something about meeting them in person. And I think both she and I were really surprised by the naturalness, that how natural that felt, that ease and comfortability and sense of home and resonance was still translated. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just curious if in your meeting with these folks in London, if you had any degree of that as well.
It's funny what I'm getting in touch with, even with you mentioning what they look like and so on. What I'm actually remembering is my experience with my Gestalt cohort, because I started during COVID, so we never met in person, even though it's a local course. So we didn't meet in person until after first year, where we all met at the beach so that we're distanced. And I remember meeting, before I met the whole cohort, I met Andrea, and I remember thinking, wow, you're shorter than I thought. And at the same time, I'm thinking, but it feels like I've met you many times before. And I think that experience of having met people who have watched me be a therapy client with my lecturer, for example, in person after so much depth between us for an entire 9-10 months, I think I kind of knew what to expect. By that point, they had already felt like home for so long. Something energetically just worked so quickly with our group. I don't know if this is the norm, but it certainly worked very well with us. And so I was just I remember telling my friend from Malta, but she lives in London. I remember telling her, I'm off, and she's like, oh my God, like enjoy and so on. And I remember realizing that I doesn't actually feel like I'm meeting someone for the first time. But I don't mean this in a nonchalant kind of way. I mean this in a, again, I guess it's this feeling of, I feel like I'm going home. I feel like I'm just, it's just, this is, and yes, I get to hug you now instead of just see you on screen. But I just loved being in their space, and I'm so grateful, and I was so touched to that they made the time to come and see me. And
Mhm.
I look forward to seeing them again and again in future.
Yeah, I'm a full-on advocate for a community-wide as well as like cohort reunions. It's got to happen. It's got to
Yeah.
happen. Yeah, I love the magic of that, and this, and that what you just named there is it didn't even feel like this big deal, but not in a nonchalant way, just because there was so much depth and familiarity between. So I love what you've named there, and I would like to dig in a little bit more to these trainings. So for anyone that doesn't know, I guess my curiosity here is I'm very curious about why you chose a Gestalt therapy training, specifically what it was about that had you begin that program. And then for anyone that doesn't know, if you could just explain a little bit about Gestalt and what that means, and of course, as I said, why that appealed to you and why you began that master's program.
Okay. Um, I wish I had a really amazing story as to why I ended up in Gestalt, but it was very much I was in therapy. I was doing a lot of soul searching with what I wanted to do, job wise, studies, and I met two friends of mine for a coffee to catch up. They mentioned that Gestalt exists because I mentioned it, and I said, "Ah, what's this Gestalt you speak of?" And I went to therapy, and I told my therapist, "My friends recommended Gestalt, and I see on your receipt that you are a Gestalt therapist. Can you tell me more about it?" Because I went to her for a recommendation. It's not because she was a Gestalt therapist. And that's how I ended up in Gestalt. So originally, that's why I said I wish I have a better story, but it was more like my
Mm.
friends mentioned it. Oh, you're a Gestalt therapist. Oh, maybe this makes sense. But I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And realistically, and I think this isn't a unique experience, an experience which is unique to me. Um, I don't think you really get it until like a year or two into the course.
Mhm.
um, Gestalt is, it looks at the person as a whole. We focus a lot on present experience of the person. So what are you experiencing now? Um, it is it focuses a lot on the bodily experience. We use the body a lot to inform us. Um, it's it's quite strongly focused on awareness and on what we call the paradoxical theory of change. In fact, it's what I did my final presentation on, the paradoxical theory of change and attachment theory, two particular interests of mine. And the paradoxical theory of change is about trying not to force change and rather just accepting, which is um, a lot of what we also end up, I think, doing in body oriented coaching, where we're just being with the experience, what is going on, accepting, allowing, um, being compassionate to ourselves, to our experience, to all the parts of us that come up. So I think those are some of the main elements of Gestalt. It's always when people tell me what is Gestalt, I'm like, I don't really know how to explain this in a way that won't send me into an hour long ramble, but I think those are some of the main elements I can bring forward today.
You did really well. That was so succinct and well explained, and you touched on this as well. But Gestalt is an influence on the body-oriented coaching training through the Somatic School. And so I'd love to talk about, in your opinion, how and why these two modalities play so well together. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. I guess I'm kind of getting in touch with my experience. And as I mentioned earlier, Gestalt is, as we've been saying, is quite body oriented as a modality in any case. And I think there is the sort of more talk, maybe a bit more cognitive element to it as well. And then the body oriented coaching is what to me brings the body part, like allows us to, okay, this is where we need to go into the body. And there's a lot of parallels with what we do, even with experiments, for example. I'm going to can I suggest an experiment? You mentioned your 10-year-old self. Where is she? Can we bring her into the room or something like that? Just using the experiments of what is coming into our current experience. And I think I don't know if I've answered the question. I'm sorry. This is how I feel. There's a lot of overlap. In fact, I think one of the toughest things for me was to make sure that I recognize how to separate the two, the therapy and the body oriented coaching, because there is, when it comes to body oriented coaching, there's a depth to it which maybe people don't recognize. When you hear the word coaching, you think quite instructive, quite informative. But there's such a depth to body-oriented coaching, which I find extremely beautiful. And in fact, I had a last session with a client yesterday, and she told me the word, and she's a Gestalt student as well, and she's like, the word coaching is very misleading. This is a lot deeper than that. And yeah, so it's been a journey of mine to sort of explore as well where those lines cross, because there's a lot of just overlap. We're just dropping into the body, just being what is going on in the here and now, which is something we say a lot in Gestalt. What is going on in the here and now? Don't think forward, don't think back. Just now, what's happening now.
Ooh, I really like this, Steffi. I do feel like you were answering the question, and we were talking about how they play well together. And so what I'm hearing you say is the present moment focus, that real emphasis on the present moment, as well as the going into the body, noticing what's there, what's happening. And then this depth as well. So hearing those parallels, and then what's come out of that is just that in your own journey, you've had to actually wrap your head around or come to understand where the separation is and how to navigate that. Will you tell me more about the separation then?
Yeah, I think again, I guess in Gestalt, because I was going to say what I focus on more in the somatic coaching is that doing less element, whereas in therapy, even though the therapist is not going to be speaking a lot, it is maybe a bit more bi-directional than I would think. I would feel a bit is the case in body-oriented coaching. It's a sensation I get and an experience I have within the coaching session. I'm really struggling to put it into words. But I guess there's maybe, and I use this word very loosely, but there's maybe a bit more, what I sense is a bit more of a simplicity to the coaching. And by this I don't mean it is simpler or we do less, or it's more of a supporting the client, being in contact with the client, and supporting them to stay with the bodily experience. Just really trying to go back to that present moment bodily experience, bringing back within the limits of the capacity of the client, of course. But also a bit maybe cautious not to be misleading with it, because I don't know if I'm explaining it well enough, this particular aspect of it.
Yeah, that's okay. So maybe see if it's helpful if I just say, for you, right? So you've, as you're talking about the separation, and I think this brings up a really valid question that we get all the time as helping professionals, especially when you're talking about these more body-oriented approaches. How do you, when someone asks you what's the difference between therapy and coaching, or how do you contract for that? What might you tell them? How do you broach that subject if a client is asking you? Is there anything there that feels a bit easier to answer?
I've not actually been faced with this question, and interesting food for thought. I've noticed that people usually come with an intentional one or the other. Yeah.
Okay, then can we talk about that? So you're noticing that when you're working with people, they're either coming wanting therapy or wanting coaching. So is there any difference, or what are the differences that you notice about why they're seeking one or the other?
Okay. There is more of a, what's coming to me quite strongly actually is, so with therapy, especially with Gestalt therapy, it tends to be a slightly more long-term type of therapy. It's not like cognitive behavioral therapy where you're likely to do a certain amount of sessions and then that's about it. So with Gestalt, it tends to be slightly longer term, kind of as a modality. And what's been interesting is that I've had a couple of recommendations for somatic coaching clients from ex Gestalt therapists of mine who knew that I was on the somatic coaching journey, and they recommended to their own clients, to other clients of theirs, to come to me, because there would be like something specific that can be addressed. And what I've noticed is that sometimes clients have been approaching me maybe sometimes for something a bit more like I've had a really hard week and I really need to unpack what's going on, or something happened a month ago and I can't let go of it, or am I able to have a few sessions because I need to unpack that? And there's just this like more intentionality, maybe a bit more of a narrowed down. Yeah, it's almost a bit like you go straight to that, which is the sticking point, and just dealing with that, allowing it to unfold, mold itself, warp, transform, and then hopefully be released, which is the experience of many in somatic coaching. So there's almost like maybe there's a supportive element to the two in any case. So I have, as I'm saying this, I think all of the people I've seen so far, all of them are actually Gestalt students. So there's been a lot of complementary work there. Okay. So that's what came to me now. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey because obviously I know both sides to it, and there seems to have been a lot of work that's been done in the somatic coaching, which has been complementary to the therapy. But almost because we're in that space of we're going to stay with the body, and it's almost like it's easier to not go into that cognitive prefrontal cortex work, which we know goes offline when you're in trigger mode anyway. So, and then we keep repeating the patterns. And it sometimes the somatic coaching stuff supports us in that way. Yeah.
I really, I like what you uncovered there. And I have this image of, and it's probably not the right image, but as you were saying it, was this image of concentric circles, or maybe separate circles, or maybe it's a Venn diagram, but they're circles in any case. But
Definitely.
okay. And I love what you uncovered about with Gestalt therapy. It seems to be like this really long game, right? This a longer term
Hmm.
relationship, a longer term container. But what's happening is you're having fellow therapy students, Gestalt therapists, refer you clients to work on more specific things. Something like, I've had a really hard week and I need to unpack that. So there's almost um, this sense of a more generalized support for people coming to you for therapy, and then a specificity and intentionality, or even like a directness, it sounds like, to people coming to you for coaching to work on something really maybe clear to them and specific. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, exactly. So the word complementary keeps coming back, you know. There's, for example, someone would have been working in therapy for a long time and in a quite committed way to deal with some struggles and patterns they're experiencing. And then we do one coaching session on some element of it which happens to come up that day. Obviously, the session barely ever starts with what we end up dealing with later, which is always really interesting. I love that part where you come in
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, I'm angry at my colleague, and then it ends up half the time being something so
Mm.
different, which I find very fascinating about us humans and the way we store things in our bodies. And yeah, and so um, I've had this experience where like we ended up doing like an inner child work through the somatic coaching using an experiment.
Mm.
Um, and it's just like this particular client felt like I've never gone here in all these years of therapy, you know. Sometimes
Mm.
it's almost like going straight to the root.
Mm. Yeah, you've mentioned verbal experiments a couple times, and so I'd love. Are you comfortable maybe telling me more about that? About how that's gone within your coaching relationships?
Yeah, I end up feeling quite drawn to, and what seems to work a lot with my clients. Obviously, I don't just go in and this is what I like, so I'm going to direct my
Mm.
clients
Hmm.
that way.
Yes.
But I also feel sometimes it's like the right clients come to us. You know, there's like a synchronicity with clients. I definitely feel that even with therapy clients. So when it comes to verbal experiments, I feel like it helps a lot. Or even from my own experience. In fact, I am an internal family systems client nowadays, and we work with parts. And that has really helped me with the disidentification of different aspects of myself, like rather than, and we've learned about this as well in the body oriented coaching course, where you are not removing the identity of something that you're struggling with, and rather seeing it as something um that can be looked at, that can be held. And I think what I find most helpful for my clients and for myself, again, I think with all of these things I'm saying, we can just baseline assume that this all, all applies to me as well,
Mm.
um, is just seeing, like almost personifying a lot of our experiences. So I'm experiencing fear inside. I feel this fear in my, okay, so what's that fear wanting us to know? What does it need from us, etc., etc. So I think a lot of my experiments are focused on that kind of work where we use what we're feeling, we bring it into the room, we welcome it, we hold its hand, we give it a little hug.
Mm.
All the things that up to a couple of years ago I would have been like, what the hell is this? and And now I'm here, like having a hard day, and I'll go to the beach and I'll sit with my inner child next to me and sit by the sea and have a little cry.
Mm.
So I found that to be extremely helpful and so powerful. Um, because very often inside of us there is a longing within us from a younger part of ourselves who needs to be seen, to be held, to build a sense of trust and safety, which perhaps they don't experience in this present moment. And we do need to just go back there. And I say go back there, but I don't, it's not actually going back. It's these parts of ourselves live within us. We carry them with us, and they're ever present. And the sooner we tell them hello, it's like being in a room with like 10 other people and just ignoring them for many years, which would be so odd. And yet that's what we do to the parts of ourselves which live and which ultimately rule our life from from one moment to the next. Sometimes, not always, but when we're not in a centered place, in a self place, we would say in IFS, we're probably acting from one of these many different parts of ourselves, which are all valid parts. None of them are wrong. So that fear feeling, that fearful part of ourselves is not wrong. That mean part of ourselves, when we're feeling like someone's ignoring us, isn't a bad part. It's just a part that needs to trust that we can change our story now. So it's just, for me, that is all that it's about, just like falling in love with all the different parts of ourselves and self-compassion. And I think that's been the hardest and the most rewarding part of my own personal journey, and what I found to be most powerful in the work with my clients.
Yeah, I mean, you brought in IFS, and I know I will actually be talking to some folks that are IFS coaches here in the near future. And I have heard that there's a nice parallel there with focusing. So focusing, one of the skills
Exactly.
that we learned on the training, and even within our conversation, hearing you say this, and then that something in me is feeling. So not completely identifying with that part or that feeling or that emotion or that experience, but just bringing that loving presence to ourselves, and like you said, saying hello, giving it a hug. I mean, I know for me, in both my own coaching practice as well as in my own personal journey, how powerful it's been to just begin using that kind of language of something in me is feeling angry, and now I'm empowered to sit with it and be with it and hold it however it needs to be held. And yeah, it is quite life-changing. And I love this image of
Absolutely.
you. I love this image of you sitting with your inner child on the beach crying. And so I'd love to talk a bit more, and of course you've just kind of mentioned it in this last bit here, but I'd love to hear more about your personal journey and how your personal journey impacted. Maybe it was a decision, maybe it was a falling into, maybe it was a natural progression into working with people around their inner child. So yeah, could you tell me a little bit more
Yeah.
about what led you there?
Yeah. Um, there's so much depth to my inner child's work. I wouldn't even know where to begin. So again, cognitively, I knew about the importance of inner child work for a long time. And I think I remember I couldn't connect to my inner child. I'm like, inner child who? I couldn't. And then I was in a difficult relationship at some point in my life in recent years, and I was in a very anxious place, and there was a coach who suggested to me, write whatever you wish for this person to say to you. Like, in an ideal world, in this most magical, perfect world, everything that this person would tell you. So I wrote all these things down, and they said, sort of, come back to me when you've done that. So I did this. And then I went back and they said, okay, now say those things as though you're saying them to yourself. And I maybe read 3 of them out of a whole list, and I just broke down. And it was in that moment I felt like I was speaking to my younger self. I don't know what switched. I don't know what. Something happened there. There was a shift, and suddenly I'm like, I am speaking to a young Steffi. I'm not speaking to myself now. Like, this is definitely a younger part of me. And I remember just bawling my eyes out. And suddenly, I didn't feel like I needed like that strategy of needing something from someone else, right? Which is a strategy, which isn't, I suppose, the most ideal place to be in relation to someone else. But that suddenly became unimportant. And suddenly I have this relief because I can hold myself in that space, and I have this power, and there was this empowerment, and that was just the beginning. And over time, I started to realize that it became more and more accessible to me. What helps a lot is I have a niece who reminds me of myself a lot as well. And it's easier to connect with a younger version of myself when I can watch someone grow up who reminds me a lot of myself. Like, for example, a tiny detail, but she is someone who knows what's going on around her. It's very clear that she can notice things more than maybe you'd expect a kid to notice. And I remember feeling like that, like I used to notice things. And so that allowed me, and I'm very, very close to my nieces, both my nieces. So I think that has been something that I'm very blessed to have access to. Someone who is actually a younger person who I can connect with. And at the beginning, it was like, I can imagine hugging my niece. I can imagine holding her and loving her so much. So I also have access to myself at that age. And I can imagine hugging my younger self and holding my younger self. And that's kind of sort of the seed was planted through these couple of experiences. And now it's at the point where I have 3 younger photos of myself collaged together. I printed them, like a really bad printout, stuck it with terribly ugly tape on the wardrobe of my bedroom. And sometimes I notice, like, there are moments where, for example, again, this was in a relationship where I was struggling a bit with my own attachment struggles and so on, and I'm feeling anxious and I'm needing something. And there was one time where I noticed I was working, and I was working away and just like trying to squash down this anxious feeling. And then I said, I needed to go to the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom in my bedroom. And on my way out, something just made me sort of do a bit of a left turn, went to the photos, and I'm like, what do you need from me? And again, this took me completely away from what the strategy I was fighting so hard for, to get something from my partner at the time. And suddenly I saw this vulnerable self, and I was able to just look at her, see that she's hurting. I cried for a solid few minutes, and then that's it. It's just like, that's just connecting to this inner child, lifted like that. That's like, well, I don't know if you would know, but this anxious, like this heavy, icky feeling, this is where I feel it. I always hear, because it's like there's this blockage here in my heart area, and suddenly it just like fizzled away. So yeah, that was like early days of my inner child work. And nowadays I love the sea, so the sea has been very healing for me in my life. I live in Malta on an island where we're blessed with beautiful waters. So the sea has always been a very big healing place for me. I'm lucky enough nowadays to live very close to one of my favorites, my favorite beach growing up as well. And even I remember after the Somatic School days, sometimes where I just needed to remain in contact with myself so that if I stay home, I would go into doing stuff. So I'd just finish with close of the day, and then I'd just literally go into my car, drive. I would have been going through an intense time again with the course and a lot of things. Just drive to the sea, sit there, like listen to some powerful music, and little Steffi was right there chilling next to me, and we were just hanging out and allowing ourselves to be emotional. And sometimes it lasted 10 minutes, sometimes it lasted half an hour. Then I just hit home.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm wondering about, building this relationship. Well, there's two things. First of all, how to articulate this. There's something about, as we're talking about Gestalt and as we're talking about body-oriented coaching and just this idea of this like hyper focus on the present moment, like that's here for me. And this idea of bringing this version of yourself from the past into the present moment to do the work, to invite healing. So that's really here for me. So I just wanted to call that out. And then I think I'm curious about cultivating this relationship with your younger self, with different versions of your younger self, like having this relationship with your inner child. How has that impacted you? I mean, who are you as a result of that?
Oh, I love that question. Who are you as a result? Um, I am at in the early days of the most compassionate I've ever been to myself. Um, I've always been the perfectionist, the wanting to succeed at the things I do, my own biggest critic, my own worst enemy when it comes to wanting to get done right. No leeway for making mistakes or just being so hard on myself. And nowadays I can connect to just the compassion. And even if it's hard, at least I'll connect with, oh, this is hard. Like I'm struggling to connect, to be compassionate with myself right now because, for example, I handled that situation in a way that didn't feel very aligned on reflection or as time passed and I'm less triggered. And I notice maybe there's a difficulty in because I've done so much work and I should be better at this. And as we know, that's not how it works. It takes so much time. And it doesn't mean that just because we've worked on a lot of something and we've come a million steps forward that we won't take a few steps back. And just allowing. I keep using the word allowing. I'm just going to stick with that actually because that's also something that keeps coming up with my clients. And whenever I use the word allowing, it's always like this, I really like that. And it always feels so right in the moment to use the word allowing. And then it seems to land really well with my clients. So I think that I'm going to go with that because it's a word that's very present to me right now. I think just an allowing to be where I am in the moment. And sometimes there's still a bit of fear that creeps up because it's like maybe where I am right now is not good enough. So what if we lose this or what if this happens because of we're not there yet? But again, we go back to these different parts and trying not to identify with these parts and just holding all the different parts, which again is usually all younger versions of ourselves.
Yeah, allowing them to be there, allowing them to have voice. I love
Yeah.
I say I love all the time. I love that you brought that word instead of trying to find another word to describe. You just acknowledged that this language concept of allowing is feeling really resonant for you in this moment, as well as something that you really notice um, as you described it. That language of allowing maybe sparks this exhale from clients as well.
What's also coming to me, it's like, I think at one point it came up in the context of giving permission to or accepting. It's almost like accepting. There's a sense of, sometimes in some contexts, accepting can bring with it a sense of defeat. It's like maybe there's a sense to it that we've kind of, the way the word has evolved. Whereas allowing, it's similar, but and then there's a sense of empowerment. For me, at least, this is how I feel it. I feel the sense of empowerment, like I am allowing this to be here, and I want it to be here, and it's okay for it to be here, rather than a sort of sit back and accept that. I'm not hating on the word accept, but in some contexts,
Accepting.
I'm really okay with the word accept, but there's something that somehow lands differently when yeah.
Yeah, a couple things. We're getting close to the end, but it feels very meta that through this conversation, what I'm hearing and noticing is the importance of finding the right language to describe our experience, which also feels very somatic school. It feels very somatic. It feels very, capturing the felt sense of something, finding, well, that's not quite right. No, not accepting, allowing is the right word. And so that's, I think, just a really beautiful demonstration of, the importance of really naming our experience and allowing it to be as it is. And that reminds me so much of the somatic school and of that training, the body oriented coach training, and both my own journey with allowing allowing myself to show up as I am, allowing all of the parts of myself to be present, allowing what is here for me to be here for me, allowing myself to stay with it, as well as extending that to clients, allowing them to be in process, allowing them to be unfolding in that process, and holding the container for that, and the presence that makes that feel, allows that to feel more possible,
Yeah.
secure, safe, all of these words. So anyways, all of that rambling I just did has me wanting to ask you, and in your own journey with allowing, where has your experience with the somatic school played into that journey of allowing?
Oh yeah. I as you're speaking and when you said the word showing up, you said something around showing up sort of exactly as we are. I'm probably misquoting you, but the showing up. And I remember one of the, at some point you give feedback. I don't know if it was at the end of the course. I can't remember in what context or in sort of at which point. But one of the things that was pointed out to me was that I always showed up so to speak, authentically. I always showed up wherever I was, and I think someone said something like, and that allowed me to show up how I am. And I'm actually reading a book on becoming a therapist um, by, it's next to me right now, by Carl Rogers.
Nice. Yeah.
And it's just the importance of showing up as we are in any space, whether it's a therapeutic space, whether it's a coaching space, whether it's in our lives, whether it's at work, in our social life, in our relationships, just showing up as we are. And even if that is maybe not great, maybe just being able to share it. Like, I don't feel very present today, and just allowing ourselves to be held, in that sometimes vulnerable space, because it is quite vulnerable, right, to show up in a space. I think sometimes you're sort of taught in that space we have to be like this and we have to look really professional in that space, and I have a lot of resistance. This is something I need to work through more, where I have a lot of resistance to certain spaces which require me to be a certain way, which I don't feel comfortable being. And I guess I do recognize that in some spaces in society that there is some element of requirement for that. But as I'm on this journey of allowing myself to be where I am at any given moment, and to learn how to accept and welcome people in whatever space they are in the moment, because that's also a big part, right? Like, there's no point in me showing up authentically and then being really difficult about someone else showing up authentically. But in and of itself, that's a massive journey, because our own wounds will make us have expectations of people, have our own desires, and so on. It's just in the somatic school. I've gone off on a tangent, I realize,
I
because you
love
said
tangents. We love tangents.
oh, my brain. Okay, so I remember. Usually, I don't even remember what the original point was. So this is me coming leaps and bounds that I even remember what you asked. um, what you asked at the beginning is how sort of did the somatic school sort of tie into all this. I had Sam as our lecture teacher, um, and he just made it so easy for everyone to just show up, and he showed up like as he was as well, and it just gave us so much permission to also show up the way we needed to be. I was at a point in my life where I was just so many levels of exhausted, and sometimes there were moments where I felt like, oh, I'm showing up again, and I had a hard month because this happened, or I'm about to resign from my job, so that feels difficult. But then ultimately, I always went back to, you know what? If I don't show up authentically, somehow it's going to come through, probably. And that somehow, at some point, or it's just going to be an inability for me to be present, because I'm creating a barrier between me and the rest. So that, and then always took me back to, it's okay, just show up however you are. And if anyone has a problem with that, there might be a lot more going on with their own process if there's a resistance to allowing me to be in a difficult space, because I was going through a difficult time.
Yeah, just that. I think the modeling and the permission and the space to show up as you are. Yeah, and I laugh because Sam definitely does that. It's really, I'm in the accelerator program, sort of a skill revisiting, continual training type program with the Somatic School, and Sam is training on that, and so I'm very familiar with his lovely, hilarious, very authentic and real presence. So I'm chuckling at that and just like, love you, Sam. Shout out to Sam. Yeah. Okay. So to wrap this up, thank you so much, Steffi, for sharing so vulnerably. So just to wrap things up, I'd love to know Is there an encouragement, a motto, a mantra, a few words that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Mm. I think what comes to me is this, going back to the self-compassion and just the word compassion. And I think for anyone maybe at the beginning of their healing journey, or perhaps who feels stuck or anything of the sort, I think going back to the find ways, how can compassion come to you? How can compassion show up to yourself and to others? Because ultimately everything is relational.
Beautiful.
Even what feels like very much a separate and inner and solo struggle is quite likely a relational struggle of some sort or other.
Yeah, finding the ways to allow compassion for ourselves and others. Beautiful. And then just finally, Steffi, what are you leaving this conversation with?
Just this appreciation for the space that the Somatic School has created in general, for the space that you've provided. You've made this conversation feel safe from the first time we spoke on a call where I didn't know what to expect. So I'm leaving with a lot of appreciation and gratitude for this opportunity. And I guess I've shared vulnerably today, and I feel like I wanted to show up and allow, I mentioned to you, just allow whatever comes to come. And this has felt like such a nourishing space to be able to just share so vulnerably, and some of these things are things that I would have shared with some of the closer people in my life, but not even necessarily, or not even most things, not because I shy away from it, but because maybe there isn't always an opportunity for that. So just to have this space to share what's been such a meaningful journey for me in so many ways, on so many levels. Just super grateful.
Thank you, Steffi. I'm leaving here with like just the resonance and the threads that like bring us together as a community, and a deep love and respect for that resonance. And then also, I think, awe at the variance, and just the multitude of different ways that we as Somanauts are all working. And your perspective today is not one that I've heard before, yet in it there is so much familiarity and resonance. And I love the both andness of that. That's typically here in these conversations, that is certainly here in our conversation. And it's just so awesome. It's so cool. So thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for being here. It was an absolute joy.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
All right. And thank you, listeners. That is our episode. We will catch you next time on Radio Somanaut. This is Whitney Dawn Pyles. Thank you so much for listening. That's our show, folks. I hope you found something nourishing, enjoyable, or inspiring in today's episode. Thank you for being here, and see you next time. In the meantime, you can follow us on Instagram at Radio Somanaut. You can also find out more about the Somatic School and our accredited diploma in body-oriented coaching at thesomaticschool.com, or follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. This is Whitney Dawn Pyles, encouraging you to stay present, stay curious, and stay connected.